Welcome to the Gulf Coast Growth Show. This is a special edition. You're missing your normal hosts, Jason and Zeke, but you get Chad today. And I've got actually a good friend with me, new friend over the last couple of years now. But I'd like to introduce everybody to State Representative Jared Patterson from way up in North Texas near Denton. He represents House District 106.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's right.
So yeah, everybody might be asking, hey, what do you got a North Texas guy down here for? But two or three good reasons. One, he works for Able Power Management, right, which is a member of the Economic Alliance. And they specialize in power, electricity.
That's right.
Selling electricity and everything. Two, he has got a tremendous background in everything electric reliability, obviously with his work for Able, but then in the State House with some of his work really over the last couple of years, trying to make sure that Texas is lights are going to come on.
That's right. Absolutely.
And as well as some transportation experience as well in the House. So we'll jump into that. But before I go too far, I want to let Jared tell us a little bit about himself, his district. He's got some history here in Houston. He's back here in Houston, kind of working now, and then maybe some of the work in the legislature. So just give us the 101, the thumbnail of Jared Patterson.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's interesting to be here in Deer Park. My brother-in-law was a football coach here for a while and moved back up to North Texas, but it's kind of neat to be in this community. Look, I grew up in North Texas. My mom was a teacher for 38 years. My dad was a mailman with the U.S. Postal Service. So I grew up in a small town in a blue collar home and, always just kind of had a heart for service. Graduated from Texas A&M University.
Which makes him a good guy.
That's right. Absolutely. 100%. I'm used to hearing some whoops in the background, but, not too many people in this room right now. But when I graduated from A&M, my first job out of college was down here in Houston. Working for a company called Dynegy that was down here at the time, trading real-time power on the ERCOT grid. It was kind of crazy. It was a couple years after Enron, and I think they'd pretty much hire anybody. And so, I got a job there, worked here in Houston for a little while, lived in the Heights and lived downtown. And then, wanted to get back up to North Texas where I'm from. And so been up there for a while, but 2 years ago, kind of retracing those work routes, started after almost 20 years in the industry, joined Able Power Management down here in Houston, and been working helping folks with their electricity needs ever since. In the Texas House, was elected in 2018. Currently in my fourth session, last two sessions on transportation, which deals a lot with the ports. Obviously a lot of issues on that with the ports and everything this session as well. So. It's been fun. It's been interesting, learning a lot, every single day, and really enjoy it.
Well, I'm not going to run down the transportation rabbit hole because that's my bailiwick here, and really our number one priority in the port region.
Yeah.
So, but I want to talk electricity instead of transportation.
Yeah, absolutely.
In my mind, both infrastructures, obviously,
100%.
as far as our ability to in this region compete for capital investment from all around the world. So if we can deliver reliable energy, if we can move products and people in this region, then we're doing good. And you're really kind of helping on both fronts.
Yes, sir.
So that's why Jared's our good friend, right? so let's jump into. So you mentioned the word ERCOT in your intro there. So obviously huge topic around here since the Winter Storm Uri and obviously Beryl. We were without power here at the office for a week.
Yeah.
Lots of just really, really interesting and neat stories about how everybody worked together. But yeah, without power for a while. So tell us a little bit about ERCOT. What does it do? What does it mean? And then follow that up with, okay, we're going into hurricane season, the heat of the summer. What's that look like for kind of the end of the summer? Are we going to have enough power this year?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about ERCOT and what that means.
Yeah.
To everybody.
And we could do an entire day's worth of info on this topic alone, but ERCOT is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. ERCOT is essentially the air traffic controller for the grid. ERCOT does not own any wires. They don't own any meters or transformers. They don't own any electrons on the grid. They are the air traffic controller. So what that means is that they make sure that when you go over and you press that button on the wall to turn light on, that it comes on. period, the end. That's what their job is. They're regulated by the Public Utility Commission of Texas, which has several commissioners appointed by the governor. So that's kind of the regulatory body over ERCOT. But they call the balls and the strikes, so to speak. The good news for Texans is that ERCOT is the most reliable grid in the nation. You wouldn't have the infrastructure that you all have in your region, the companies that you all have in your region. You wouldn't have Samsung coming in and building a $40 billion plant here. You wouldn't have Texas Instruments coming into Sherman, Texas and North Texas, building a $30-something billion plant if the ERCOT grid wasn't the best in the country.
They didn't know for sure. It's that certainty
100%.
that all companies are looking for, right?
That's
whether it's
right.
regulatory or whether it's utilities, they're looking for that certainty and the ability to flip the switch, like you said, is
100%. Yeah. And that's not to say that there aren't issues. I mean, you're dealing with, infrastructure that's in the air. And, when we have a natural disaster, things are going to happen. But, Texans should rest assured that ERCOT is the most reliable and stable grid in the nation. And that's exciting.
Two quick things. So ERCOT and the grid is basically Texas, right?
Yeah, it's most of Texas. There's part of like Montgomery County over to Beaumont.
Yeah, we got a little bit on the east side, and then maybe way out in El Paso.
El Paso Electric is not in ERCOT, and then there's a tiny piece up in the Panhandle that's not. But most Texans, including the Texas Triangle, from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, down to San Antonio and over to Houston, where most Texans live, where most Texans work. All of West Texas, the oil and gas industry, all of that is ERCOT.
And we are separate. We, as Texans will do, the state that was its country, this is our grid, basically, right? We're it's not the East Coast, it's not the West Coast, it's Texas. It's ERCOT's grid. Right?
Absolutely. And there's a number of benefits to that. I mean, number one, it limits the federal involvement, in our grid because we don't cross state lines. We have a couple of small ties, but not enough to get the feds involved. And then it also keeps us from each individual state that passes electricity policy. It keeps us, kind of sheltered from that as well. I mean, we are our own animal and we're the only one in the nation that's that way.
Yeah.
But, our grid is also the biggest state grid in the nation. So if you look at California, the most populous state, they actually have a bigger economy than Texas, but their peak demand is less than 60% of what our peak demand is in Texas because of the types of industries that we have here and because of the hot weather that we have.
Think about that, folks. Their economy is larger than ours, yet their power demand, peak demand is 60% of what we use here in Texas.
Absolutely. And ours is growing like crazy.
Right. Yeah. And absolutely. We'll get into some of the growth here in a minute. Okay. So, and I love the way that you said that ERCOT is the air traffic controller for basically the electrons.
That's right.
So they're not generating the power.
Nope.
They're not the wires and the distribution and transmission system delivering the power, but they are controlling that.
That's right.
So that's a really good way of looking at it.
And what's remarkable is that power, it's not stored. And people talk about batteries and stuff. And that's kind of coming on, but electricity is really not stored like natural gas is. Natural gas is stored in the ground and pipelines and all that, and you pull it out when you need it. Electricity is immediately generated and immediately consumed. And it has to keep a certain frequency on the grid. Yep. So the fact that ERCOT is able to do that, I mean, it really blows my mind that that's even a thing that they're able to do.
Yep. It's pretty amazing. All right. So let's jump ahead a little bit. So we did have a couple of issues. And frankly, in my entire life, I think the first time that I really experienced an outage was Uri, right?
Yes.
The freeze. And it just shocked me because Texas has been so reliable for so long. And then Beryl came along, and us here in the Houston area, we understand hurricanes and trees get blown into lines, and I understand what caused that. What have we done from the state legislators' seat? What have we done over the last session now to help mitigate some of those problems? So talk to us a little bit about some of the things that that you guys in the state house have kind of pushed to help make sure that we don't get those long interruptions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Winter Storm Uri in February 21 was a storm unlike anything that we've ever seen in Texas. I wish that I could show you this chart. We have a chart of, all the past storms, all the past winter storms, and how much of an outlier Winter Storm Uri is.
No doubt.
All 254 counties frozen for that long of a period of time. And so really, I don't know that there's a lot that anyone could have done leading up to that storm because it was so historic and so massive. But what I will say is that, natural gas really overperformed during that storm. They did have some issues, but if you look at the chart of where our power generation came from, it largely came from natural gas. Now, we're talking about February of 2021. My first session of legislature in 2019, I actually laid out a bill and predicted a situation just like this, not in the winter, it was in the summer. But there's a number of white papers and a number of studies that show kind of the issues that could come up on the grid during peak times. Mm-hmm. And that's because we went through a 20-year period where almost every electron added to the grid was from a source that's not as reliable. It's from wind and solar, mainly wind power, the last 20 years. Now, solar's really come on lately. Yeah. And those are two very different items in terms of how they generate power for the grid and their effectiveness on the grid. Mm-hmm. Wind power produces electricity mainly overnight or mainly on cool days when we kind of don't need a lot of electricity. Solar power actually produces it on hot summer days in the afternoon. So when people say renewables, these are very different things. Wind kind of doesn't actually work, and solar actually works pretty well.
Different personalities.
Different things. And so the fact that we had 20 years of the federal government subsidizing renewable energy in Texas, basically offsetting cost and investment in the natural gas and coal industry, it meant that we had fewer generators online for Uri because people weren't building natural gas power generators. They were all putting their money in wind and solar. So that was an issue. We also had an issue with communication to the public. We had an issue where no one really knew what was going on and the utilities didn't communicate. We had a communication issue where we had certain gas wells or certain infrastructure that should have been on a list to not turn off during an emergency. Exactly. And they just hadn't filled out the right paperwork to do so. Mm. You had all these issues. You had the way that ERCOT manages the grid at the time. So here's the bottom line as it relates to Uri. Just about everything that you knew about the Texas grid before Winter Storm Uri has since changed. Yeah. We have changed everything. Everything from who runs ERCOT, like the actual people in charge of ERCOT, the ERCOT board has changed, the wholesale rules on power generation and how quickly we're able to get into emergency reserves and how they operate the grid has changed. Everything about it has changed. And so we're in a much better place than we even were before Uri as it relates to the ERCOT grid, how it's operated, how it's managed and all that. When it comes to Burl and other issues where we've had, straight line winds and issues where power has gone out, that's really more of an infrastructure, issue of, trees blowing into wires and things. The largest issue that we actually have in the state as it relates to keeping power on is not a natural disaster. It's actually things like snakes and rats getting into transformers and blowing one, and people losing their power. So there's a lot of different reasons why people can lose power. But the bottom line is that they're doing everything that they can to try to mitigate those risks. And but every once in a while you're going to have a natural disaster that you just couldn't plan for.
Yeah. And we had our board meeting last week. We had CenterPoint Energy come out and kind of give us that local update as to what they've done really in the last 12 months or so. Hardening the infrastructure, trimming the trees from the distribution systems. And then in a slight plug for the Gulf Coast Industry Forum, we'll have Bill Flores, chairman of ERCOT, to speak about kind of where they are at our Gulf Coast Industry Forum this September 18th. So
that's going to be great.
Yeah. Good updates on all of those fronts, kind of taking lessons learned and then tweaking our system to make it better.
Well, that's right. And, at the state level, we did a host of changes, as I mentioned, to the ERCOT board, to who runs it. There's a lot of market changes going on to make sure that we're prioritizing reliability over low cost, because, when the federal government came in and they started heavily subsidizing the renewables, well, the low cost electron was always the next electron that was up. On the grid. Well, now we've said, okay, low cost is very important, but what's more important is that reliability piece. That R in ERCOT is supposed to be the most reliable. We've also said that we're going to create the Texas Energy Fund, and we're going to start incentivizing the growth of natural gas generators in Texas, because the money just wasn't getting there because of the federal tax subsidies. on renewables, that's where all the money was going. And it's really unfortunate for taxpayers because, the federal government's kind of coming into one of your pockets and taking out your money and handing it to the renewable guys. And now the state of Texas is having to come into your other pocket, grab some money and give it to the natural gas guys. But what we've seen is that we have to spur this development. If we want to continue to grow and get from the current 85,500 megawatts, which is our peak demand now, to the 200,000 megawatts, more than double, which is what ERCOT says we're going to get to in the next 5 years, we've got to have some natural gas growth there. It would be great to have nuclear growth, but that's still a ways off. The short-term fix and really the most reliable source that is economic at this point is natural gas power generation.
It's what God put in the ground for us.
That's right.
We've kind of been blessed with abundant natural gas.
That's right.
It's the cheapest, cleanest burning fuel there is. So
absolutely,
why don't we as Texans take advantage of that?
Yeah,
right?
and it's also nimble.
Yeah.
I watch natural gas every single day for my clients because it has a big effect on electricity rates in Texas because it's that next unit fuel. You've got your base load power and you've got these things, wind and solar's on when it is and it's off when it's not. But that natural gas power is what kind of gets us through the peaks and valleys on the grid.
So that takes us to our next point, really. You mentioned from 85,000 megawatt demands to 200,000.
Yeah,
I can't do the math on that, but that's well over 100%. It's probably 150% by 2030. So we're in 2025.
Yeah.
Right. So we're talking about more than doubling, almost, 1.5, almost 2 times what we are currently at in 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to have to bring a lot of power generation on. Obviously, we just talked about, the quickest, cheapest way to get that is going to be, and most reliable way is going to be natural gas.
Yeah.
Possibly some nuclear.
I'd love to see some nuclear development. Our peak demand grew in Texas from 2022 to 2023 by more than our total nuclear assets in Texas.
Yeah.
So think about that. Our demand growth is growing at such a clip that it's more than all of our nuclear assets. We haven't had a new nuclear plant built in this nation in almost 30 years. Now, there was a reactor added to one in Georgia, but a new nuclear plant we haven't had added in 30 years. But there's a lot of changes in that industry. There's a lot of growth going on with these small modular reactors. I think Dow Chemicals building one
down in Freeport,
for the first time in Texas. And so there's a lot of excitement there. But ERCOT says, and it makes some assumptions. I don't know that we're actually going to get to 200,000. It's probably going to be less than that, and maybe even a decent amount less than that. But even if we get to 150, 160, that's still doubling.
We're still doubling where we're at.
Chad, think about that. You're talking about doubling the growth. The growth is going to be double what we have now. So think about this. An extra Dallas-Fort Worth, an extra Houston, an extra San Antonio, an extra Austin, an extra Midland, Odessa, and Tyler, and Sherman Denison, and Laredo. All of these, just doubling all of it. That's the type of peak demand growth that we're going to see here within just the next few years here in ERCOT. It's really incredible when you think that we're already the largest state for power demand, and we're going to more than double in the next few years, according to ERCOT. It's really incredible. Now, a lot of that is data center growth, technology growth.
Yeah.
We've seen the Bitcoin stuff. We've seen the data centers and the AI. It is really amazing how much growth is coming.
Yeah, I think I heard the governor say day before yesterday, for the 20-something year in a row, we are maybe the 20th year in a row. We're the state that is the best for business.
That's right.
So it's kind of a victim of our own success. Right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The more business we bring here, the more people we bring here, the more demand for energy we bring here, especially with high demand entities like data centers that are gonna be coming in hard.
Most people think about traffic on the roads, as we grow, but it's everything. It's water, it's cell phone towers, it's certainly the electricity grid. And all of that is because of our economic growth and our population growth. 1,600 new residents every single day in Texas. When you woke up this morning, there were 1,600 new people here that weren't here yesterday. And then the economic growth is just astounding. And so, it's something that we've got to figure out as it relates to the grid specifically. the data centers, it looks like what's going to happen there with the ones that do come, it looks like a lot of them are going to invest in their own generation assets
I've heard
combined
that.
at their facilities.
Yeah.
So that's going to really help, in terms of that part of the growth.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's going to be businesses just like it happens here in your region where, a big major corporation, like Chevron's here. Well, there's little businesses that pop up around it that support that. Well, it's the same thing with the data centers. You have a data center that comes in and there may be businesses that grow up around it to kind of support that industry in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So the data center is going to build their own power plant most likely. But all of this other growth around it, all the population growth and everything, they're not bringing power plants with them when they come. So we've got to do everything that we can to try to incent that. There's a lot of solar being added to the grid. There's some battery stuff that's being added. But
we've seen
really
just in our footprint, we've seen 5 different battery projects, battery storage projects, just between here and Galveston in the last 12 months. So talk a little bit, you talk about incentivizing gas power generation.
Yes.
Tell us just a little bit about what the state has done on that.
Yeah, so the 2023 session, we started this fund. And again, this is after years of the federal government so heavily incentivizing wind and solar that
Believe me,
nobody's investing there.
We've seen for a decade, we've seen the turbines come in via the port.
Oh, yeah.
And hit trucks and head towards West
That's
Texas
it.
and South Texas.
That's it.
So we've seen that for a decade.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so what Texas is doing is they started this Texas Energy Fund. And so it's basically a low-cost loan. I think it's a 3% interest rate, which looks better and better, every day it seems like. But it's a low-cost loan with a completion bonus to try to incent companies to build gas-fired generation here in Texas. And so it was kind of our best effort to say, we've got to compete with the federal government on getting new gas-fired generation here. It's just the most reliable, the best source of electricity that we can have. But, the problem is it still takes 3 years to get a gas plant up and running.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about 5 years out, this massive growth. So we're already behind the 8 ball, and we've got to get that growth going.
Good. Well, we talked a little bit about we all kind of went through the renewables and where we are on that. I know our mix is about 30% right now.
That's an interesting point. So people often talk about the amount of power that's produced by renewables, and you'll hear there's some shills for the renewable. And I'm not here to bash any industry, but there are some folks online that are always pumping up the renewable industry. It's like, hey, today they powered 60% of the grid or whatever. And it's like, yeah, it's 68 degrees outside.
Yeah, you
the
can
wind's
look
blowing
at
and
that.
it's
You can
sunny.
pull that up on the internet and just look and see every day kind of what
Absolutely.
what it is. But,
and it's just
talk to me about August 15th.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And so that's the key is what happens at peak.
Yeah.
What happens at peak? Now, the good news for Texas is that the wind power, I think, and I've called it the biggest infrastructure disaster in the history of the state. I think it was the biggest mistake that we made as a state was to allow the wind power in. But again, a renewable is not a renewable. The solar power that we have coming into Texas is a different animal. Solar produces the most on hot summer afternoons when we need power the most.
Right on time.
And so you've got this situation where solar growth is just astronomical. It's through the roof. Now, taxpayers are paying through the nose for that because the incentives are like 16 times what the wind industry gets, and the wind industry gets a multiple of what the oil and gas industry gets, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of cash being flooded in for solar, but solar actually helps. The problem that we have with solar is that at 9:02 p.m., when the sun is starting to set, and it's still 102 degrees outside, solar's not producing.
Yeah.
So it falls off a cliff immediately.
Yeah.
That's where they hope that this battery technology comes in, but the battery technology really isn't there yet. It may get there at some point, but it's really just not there yet. And maybe as that develops, it'll continue to get better. But really what's going to solve that problem is that's when the natural gas guys are really going to ramp up,
Exactly.
and fill that gap until maybe sometime in the overnight hours, the wind guys may be there, from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. or something. But natural gas is going to fill that void. So when I used to look at power prices, especially wholesale prices, and be concerned about 4 to 5 p.m. in the summer.
Yeah.
Now that's shifted to where we're concerned about 9 to 10 p.m. in the summer.
Right after the sun goes down.
It's a major issue that our entire grid is having to deal with at this point. So when you look at power prices in the future, and this is what I'm, kind of advising my clients on right now is, if we're going to practically double our peak demand, over the next, 5 years, and it still takes 3 years to build a natural gas power plant, and there's not a lot of them in the pipeline actually, then, what do we think is going to happen to power prices? In all reality, nuclear is probably still 10 years off, maybe at best, maybe 10 years off. And so what do we think is going to happen to power prices? And so I think consumers are going to have to do everything that they can to try to watch the market and really protect themselves over the next 5 to 7 years from, what may be this, they talk about the energy transition. Well, we're in a market transition right now. The next 5 to 7 years are critical. So I would fully expect there to be this hump of a rise in power prices before the nuclear and the natural gas plants kind of settle in and all this. So we see how this goes with all these data centers. So we're probably going to expect things to continue to go up and then hopefully fall down in about a decade with hopefully a lot of nuclear power added.
Yeah. So that brings me to our final question, or really kind of a thing I wanted you to talk about. So Able Power Management.
Yeah.
Actually a member here at the Economic Alliance. Tell us a little bit about Able Power and what you do for them and that services that you can provide for members.
Well, thank you. So what we do and what I've done for, most of my career is go alongside, an end use customer and walk alongside them through the market, help them understand the market, help them understand the risks that are out there, and help them make long-term buying decisions on their power and natural gas contracts, and help them negotiate contract terms. It's not just calling into the call center like you'd probably do if you were a residential consumer and just, calling 3 companies and getting the lowest price, on pick a day in the future. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that you don't have to wait until there's 3 or 6 months left on your contract. I have customers, predominantly work in the industrial, with industrials, and then I've got, a smattering of other clients, but we're already looking at that 27 to 30 or 28 to 32 time frame. We're not looking at, there's 3 months left on my contract. What do I do? Yeah. So we're constantly looking at that next period of time, that next buying opportunity in the market, and taking advantage of things when the market is right to do that. So, I may go in today and I may lock in a client on a contract doesn't even start till 2028. And you say, well, why would I do that now? And it's because we're watching the market every day and we're trying to make the best decisions that we can. I have clients that are coming off of contracts that were, at 3 cents. That was the lowest price that they'd ever signed in the history of their company. And we were on a long-term contract, and now they're coming off having to pay 6 cents, because of where power prices are. And it's just, it seems like the more renewable, we hear a lot that the renewables are, this low cost option, but the more renewables we get, on the grid, the higher the prices, it seems. That's because it all has to be backed up. But we have clients that are coming off that low cost, and that portion of their bill is practically doubling. Yeah. And then what's going to happen over the next 5 years as things get tighter on the grid? And so that's what we're kind of walking alongside people, helping them understand. And so we do that. We help them, with a few other things, but the main thing is just helping them make smarter energy decision buys in the marketplace.
Well, and you're uniquely positioned, not just with your experience, but then with the knowledge that you've got from the state legislature, or just kind of your overall career. It's like I tell people, look, you need a good doctor, you need a good mechanic, and you need somebody that understands the power market, so that you can, if your business relies, if that's one of your cost centers, you need to rely on a specialist, and in this case, Jared, you're the specialist.
Yes,
so
sir.
I highly recommend our folks to reach out to you.
Thank you.
And just have that conversation. What's it look like? We have, we own the facility that we're in right now, so we walk through that process as well. So I understand the game that you're trying to maneuver for your clients, and it can save a lot of money. If you don't do it right, it can cost you a lot of money. So,
well, that's right. And, budget certainty for a lot of people is critical, especially in power intensive industries. And so
manufacturing,
that's what we're trying to do.
it's a severe a real cost center.
That's right.
And if you manage it smartly with someone like yourself and Abel, then you're gonna come out better at the end. So
That's right.
appreciate what you're doing
Yes, sir.
for clients, for people in our region, and want to introduce you to everybody here at the Economic Alliance and let them get to know you.
Yes, sir.
Other
I appreciate it.
than up at the house every other
That's
year.
right. I
Every
know.
other year.
Well, and it's becoming more than every other year.
I know.
you
It sounds to me like as we sit here today, it
Yeah.
sounds like y'all are heading back up
That's
for
right.
at least one special
Less
session.
than a month. We'll be
So-
back for at least one special. But look, I can't tell you what an honor it is to be in the Texas House.
Yeah.
I mean, to walk into that Capitol building that was built in the 1800s, and to walk onto that House floor and to have a seat and to be able to vote for the 240,000 constituents that I have in North Texas, and to make decisions that have ripple effects across what is now the 7th largest economy in the world, and
Yeah.
31 million Texans, and the huge industries that are here, especially here in your region. It's an incredible opportunity. It's an honor. And truly, it's one of the greatest things in my life outside of my family is getting to go down to Austin and to help lead our state forward. We've got a great group in the Texas House with Speaker Burrows as a new speaker,
Yeah.
This year.
Did a good job. This year.
Had a fantastic session. I think Lieutenant Governor Patrick called it the most successful, most conservative, and most successful session that we've had since he's been Lieutenant Governor now for 12 years or so. And so, the work that we've been able to do together has really been incredible, and I'm so proud of it. And I think for you guys to have Speaker Phelan in your region with his background, coming out of Beaumont, and then to have Speaker Burrows there with his intellect and his ability to work not only across party lines but across the hall with the Senate,
Yep.
has been a tremendous advantage to you guys here in this region. And so it's an exciting time in Texas.
Well, it's great to have good representation. You do a good job. It's
Thank
always
you.
good to have Aggies.
That's
in
right.
the
It is
house,
good to have
so.
Aggies. That's right.
I make all my Texas and LSU and
That's
everybody
right.
else a little upset with me, but no, it's good to have you. I appreciate your involvement here at the Economic Alliance. Like I said, what you're doing is helping our economy grow by helping companies individually. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Appreciate your work in the House. So with that, we'll wrap it up with State Representative Jared Patterson here. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time on the Gulf Coast Growth Show.